What would you do if your husband handed you divorce papers the same week he got promoted and revealed he'd known about your affair with his boss for months? I never thought my little secret would lead to this complete destruction of everything I thought I controlled. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The champagne bottle sat unopened on our kitchen counter, condensation pooling beneath it like tears I refused to shed. Colin had just announced his unexpected promotion to senior manager, a jump that should have taken him 3 more years to achieve. Instead of celebrating, he stood there staring at me with those calculating eyes I'd never noticed before. "Aren't you excited?" I asked, forcing brightness into my voice. "Finally, some recognition for all your hard work." Colin's jaw tightened. "That's just it, Isolde. I'm not sure it's my hard work that got me here." I laughed, the sound sharp in our suburban kitchen with its granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. Everything we'd worked so hard to afford. "What's that supposed to mean? You've been at Morrison & Associates for 8 years. You deserve this." "Darren Muir has been taking a very personal interest in my career lately," Colin said slowly, watching my face. "He asks about you constantly. How you're doing, if you're happy, whether you feel appreciated at home." My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my expression neutral. "He's just being friendly. Some bosses actually care about their employees' families." "Is that what you call it?" Colin's voice was dangerously quiet. "Because yesterday he mentioned how dedicated you've been, staying late so often. Funny thing is, your pay stubs don't show any overtime." The accusation hung between us like smoke. I could feel our 9-year-old daughter Sophie listening from the living room, pretending to watch television while absorbing every word of another fight between Mommy and Daddy. "I can't believe you're checking up on me like some paranoid husband," I snapped, deflecting with the righteous anger that had served me so well over the past 6 months. "Maybe if you paid half as much attention to me as you do to imaginary problems, we wouldn't have issues." Colin flinched, and I felt that familiar surge of power. He'd always been too gentle, too willing to back down when I pushed. It made him weak in my eyes, even as I married him for his stability and devotion. "I'm not imagining the late nights, Isolde. I'm not imagining how you light up when your phone buzzes, or how you've started doing your hair differently. I'm not imagining that you haven't touched me in 2 months." "Maybe I would if you acted like a man instead of a suspicious child," I shot back. "You finally get promoted, and instead of celebrating, you're inventing conspiracies. This is exactly why I caught myself before finishing that sentence, but Colin's eyes sharpened. "Why you what?" My phone buzzed on the counter. Darren's name flashed on the screen. "Miss you already. Same time tomorrow?" Colin's gaze flicked to the phone, then back to my face. In that moment, I saw something shift in his expression, a hardness I'd never seen before. "Who's texting you at 9 p.m., Isolde?" "Work stuff," I said quickly, grabbing the phone and deleting the message. You know how demanding the regional reports can be. But Colin was already walking away, his shoulders set in a line that spoke of decisions being made. As he passed the living room, he ruffled Sophie's hair and said something that made her giggle. The first genuine sound in our house all evening. I stared at that unopened champagne bottle, realizing I'd lost control of a conversation that should have been about Colin's success. Instead, it had become about my secrets, and the way Colin had looked at me suggested those secrets might not be as safe as I'd believed. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my mother. "How did Colin take the promotion news?" "I still think you could do better than him, sweetheart." I didn't respond. For the first time in months, I was wondering if Colin might be thinking the same thing about me. The next morning, Colin left for work without his usual goodbye kiss. He'd been doing that more often lately, but I'd attributed it to stress. Now I wondered if it was something else entirely. At Morrison & Associates, I settled into my data entry cubicle with unusual nervousness. The affair with Darren had started innocently enough, lingering conversations by the coffee machine, compliments about my work that Colin never bothered to give, attention that made me feel valued in ways my marriage had stopped providing. Darren was everything Colin wasn't: confident, successful, commanding. When he'd first suggested drinks after work 6 months ago, I'd told myself it was networking. When those drinks led to his apartment, I'd convinced myself I deserved passion in my life. "Morning, beautiful," Darren's voice made me jump. He stood behind my cubicle, impeccably dressed in his tailored suit, that charming smile that had first drawn me to him. "Morning, Mr. Muir," I replied formally, aware of the other employees around us. "Your husband seemed pleased about the promotion when I called him yesterday," Darren said casually, "though he asked some interesting questions about your overtime hours." My stomach dropped. "What kind of questions?" "Nothing I couldn't handle. I told him how valuable you are to the team, how much extra effort you put in." His eyes glinted with amusement. He seemed particularly interested in our evening meetings. "Darren, we need to be more careful." "Relax," he interrupted, his hand briefly touching my shoulder, in what could pass for a professional gesture. "Colin's a good man, but he's not particularly observant. The promotion should keep him busy enough to stop asking uncomfortable questions." That afternoon, I met my best friend Tina for lunch at our usual spot downtown. She was the only person who knew about Darren, and she'd been nothing but supportive from the beginning. "You look stressed," Tina observed over her salad. "Is Colin still being paranoid?" "He's asking more questions, about my schedule, about Darren, about everything." I pushed food around my plate, appetite gone. "Last night he practically accused me of having an affair." "What did you tell him?" "I made him feel guilty for not trusting me, but Tina, what if he actually knows something?" Tina leaned forward, her voice dropping. "Honey, you've been careful, right? No paper trails, no obvious meetings." "I thought so, but Darren gave Colin this promotion, and now Colin's wondering why his boss is so interested in his personal life." "Maybe it's time to end things with Darren," Tina suggested, though her tone suggested she didn't really mean it. "Before it gets complicated." "It's not that simple," I admitted. "I think I'm falling for him. When I'm with Darren, I feel like the woman I was supposed to be. Colin makes me feel ordinary." "You deserve extraordinary," Tina agreed, reaching across to squeeze my hand. "Colin's a nice guy, but nice doesn't set your soul on fire." That evening, Colin was waiting in the kitchen when I got home from what I'd claimed was a late client meeting. In reality, I'd spent 2 hours at Darren's apartment, wrapped in silk sheets and promises of a future that seemed more appealing than my suburban reality. "How was your meeting?" Colin asked without looking up from the papers spread across our dining table. "Productive. The Henderson account is finally coming together." The lie came easily. I'd been practicing it for months. "That's good. I had an interesting day too." Colin's tone was conversational, but something underneath it made me pause. "Darren took me to lunch, wanted to discuss my new responsibilities." My heart began to race. "That was nice of him." "He mentioned how much he enjoys working with you. Said you have excellent attention to detail, especially during those evening sessions." "I try to be thorough," I managed. Colin finally looked up, and his eyes held that same calculating expression from the night before. He also mentioned that he's been thinking about restructuring the department, might need to reassign some of the evening projects to other staff members. "Why would he do that?" "He said something about avoiding the appearance of favoritism. Apparently, some people have been talking about how much time you two spend together after hours." The implication hit me like a slap. If Darren was already thinking about distancing himself professionally, what did that mean for us personally? "People always talk," I said dismissively. "It doesn't mean anything." "Doesn't it?" Colin stood up, gathering his papers. "Because I'm starting to think it means everything." He walked past me toward the stairs, then paused. "Oh, and Isolde, next time you're at a client meeting, you might want to remember to take your work files with you." Hard to be productive without them. I looked down at my empty hands, then at my briefcase sitting exactly where I'd left it that morning. Colin had noticed. Colin was paying attention. And for the first time since this all began, I realized I might be in real trouble. My phone buzzed with a text from Darren. "Can't meet tomorrow. Wife suspicious. Need to lay low for a while." As I read those words, I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet. Both men in my life were pulling away, and I was starting to understand that I might have miscalculated everything. The birthday dinner for Colin's mother Martha was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, it became the night everything started unraveling in public. We sat around the table at Romano's, Sophie colouring quietly in her activity book, while the adults navigated increasingly tense conversation. Martha had always been cool toward me, but tonight her disapproval felt sharper, more focused. "So, Colin tells me you've been working a lot of overtime lately," Martha said, cutting into her chicken with precise movements. "Must be exhausting, all those late nights." "It's part of the job," I replied smoothly. "Some of us have to work harder to get ahead." The subtle dig at Colin's previous lack of advancement hung in the air. His brother Liam shifted uncomfortably, while my mother Janet nodded approvingly. "Well, thank goodness Colin finally got the recognition he deserves," Martha continued, "though it is curious how suddenly it happened. After 8 years of steady work, then boom, overnight success." "Sometimes the right people finally notice talent," I said, taking a sip of wine. "Colin just needed someone in management to see his potential." "Someone like your boss?" Liam asked pointedly. "The one who's been so interested in Colin's home life?" The question caught me off guard. I glanced at Colin, who was studying his plate with unusual intensity. "Darren Muir is a good manager," I said carefully. "He cares about his employees." "I'm sure he does." Martha's voice dripped skepticism, especially the married ones with attractive wives. "Martha," my mother Janet interjected, "I think you're reading too much into professional courtesy." "Am I?" Martha's eyes never left my face. "Because from where I sit, it looks like someone's been getting very special attention, and it's not Colin." The accusation hung over the table like a storm cloud. Sophie looked up from her colouring, sensing the tension even if she didn't understand it. "I think we should change the subject," Colin said quietly. "Why?" I heard myself say, the wine making me bolder than I should have been. "Because your family can't handle the fact that I'm successful at work, that I have a boss who actually appreciates my contributions." "Is that what you call it?" Liam's voice was dangerously low. "Appreciation? What exactly are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm saying outright that you've been acting like a woman who's forgotten she has a husband and daughter." "Liam," Colin warned, but his brother continued. "Coming home late, always on your phone, treating Colin like he's invisible. And now suddenly he gets promoted by the same boss you're spending all this extra time with. You think we're all stupid?" "I think you're all jealous," I snapped, my control finally breaking. "Jealous that I have ambition, that I'm not content to settle for mediocrity like—" I caught myself, but the damage was done. Colin's face went white, and Martha's expression turned murderous. "Like what, Isolde?" Colin's voice was barely above a whisper. "Like me?" The restaurant seemed to go quiet around us. Sophie had stopped colouring entirely, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. "That's not what I meant," I backtracked, but it was too late. Colin stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I need some air." He walked away from the table, leaving me facing the hostile stares of his family. Only my mother looked sympathetic, and even she seemed uncertain. "You should go after him," Martha said coldly. "He'll be fine. He's just being dramatic." "Dramatic?" Liam's voice rose. "His wife just called him mediocre in front of his entire family, and you think he's being dramatic?" "I didn't say—" "You didn't have to. We all heard what you meant." Martha leaned forward, her voice low and intense. "I don't know what game you're playing, but Colin deserves better than a wife who humiliates him in public." Maybe Colin deserves a wife who pushes him to be more than he is. I shot back. Maybe if he had more ambition, more drive. More what? More willingness to cheat on his family. The words came from Liam, and they hit like a physical blow. How dare you? How dare I, what? Tell the truth? You think we don't see what's happening? You think Colin doesn't see it? Sophie began to cry quietly, overwhelmed by the adult conflict swirling around her. My mother reached over to comfort her, shooting disapproving looks at Martha and Liam. "This is enough," Janet said firmly. "We're scaring the child." But the damage was done. When Colin returned to the table 10 minutes later, his eyes were red-rimmed and his jaw set in that new, hard line I was seeing more often. "We're leaving," he announced, helping Sophie gather her crayons. The drive home was silent except for Sophie's occasional sniffles from the back seat. When we pulled into our driveway, Colin finally spoke. "Pack a bag for Sophie. She's spending the weekend at my mother's." "Why?" "Because our daughter shouldn't have to listen to her parents destroy each other." As I watched him carry our sleeping child into the house, my phone buzzed with a text from Tina. "Just saw the photos from dinner on your mom's Facebook. Colin looked like he was going to cry. What if he knows?" For the first time since this all began, I wondered if the question wasn't whether Colin knew, but how long he'd known and what he planned to do about it. With Sophie at Martha's house for the weekend, our home felt like a mausoleum. Colin moved through the rooms like a ghost, polite but distant, speaking only when necessary. The silence was more unnerving than any argument. I tried to bridge the gap Sunday morning, making his favorite breakfast, and wearing the blue dress he used to compliment. But when I set the plate in front of him, he barely looked up from his newspaper. "Colin, we need to talk about what happened at dinner." "Do we?" His voice was flat, emotionless. "I didn't mean what it sounded like. I was just frustrated with your family's accusations." "Were they accusations, Isolde? Or observations?" The question hung between us like a challenge. I sat down across from him, trying to read his expression, but Colin had developed a poker face I didn't recognize. "You know I would never..." "Would never what? Work late with your boss? Take personal calls during family time? Come home smelling like cologne that isn't mine?" Each word was precise, calculated. This wasn't the emotional Colin I was used to managing. This was someone else entirely. "I think you're letting your imagination run wild," I said, falling back on the gaslighting techniques that had worked before. "Maybe you should talk to someone about these paranoid thoughts." For the first time in days, Colin looked directly at me. "Maybe I should." Something in his tone made my skin crawl. Before I could respond, he stood up and headed for his study. I heard the door close with a soft click that sounded like a lock engaging. That afternoon, while Colin was out getting groceries, I decided to look for evidence of what he might know. His study was usually off limits, but desperate times called for desperate measures. The room was meticulously organized, as always. Files arranged alphabetically, books in perfect rows, desk clear, except for his laptop and a leather-bound notebook I'd never seen before. I opened the notebook with trembling fingers. The first page was dated 3 months ago. Colin's neat handwriting documented times, dates, observations. March 15th, Isolde home 2 hours late, claims client meeting, no overtime on pay stub. March 27th, phone call during Sophie's bedtime, stepped outside to take it, laughing. March 28th, new perfume, says it was on sale, but I found the receipt, $180 bottle from Nordstrom. Page after page of careful documentation. My husband had been building a case against me for months, methodically recording every suspicious moment with the same attention to detail he brought to his work. The most recent entries were devastating. May 10th, Darren Muir asked about our anniversary plans. How does he know when we were married? May 15th, Isolde's car spotted at Meridian Towers twice this week. Darren Muir lives in Meridian Towers, Unit 1247. May 18th, promotion announced. Coincidence? I closed the notebook with shaking hands, my mind racing. Colin knew everything. The question was why he hadn't confronted me directly. The answer came when I heard his car in the driveway. I quickly returned the notebook to its exact position and hurried to the living room, trying to look casual as I pretended to read a magazine. Colin entered, carrying grocery bags, his movements calm and purposeful. "How was your afternoon?" "Fine, quiet." I watched his face for any sign that he knew I'd been in his study. "Did you get everything we needed?" "Everything and more." He began unpacking groceries with methodical precision. "I ran into Tom Bradley at the store. You remember Tom? He works in legal downtown." My blood turned to ice. "Oh?" "Interesting conversation. He was telling me about a case he's working on. Corporate executive, having an affair with a subordinate's wife. Apparently, there are laws about that sort of thing. Ethics violations, potential lawsuits." Colin's voice remained conversational, but his eyes were sharp. "Tom says the husband has been documenting everything. Smart man." "Why are you telling me this?" "Just thought it was an interesting story. Amazing how people think they can get away with things when someone's always watching." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while Colin slept peacefully beside me, or pretended to sleep. Every sound in the house seemed amplified. The clock ticking, the refrigerator humming, the subtle shift of Colin's breathing that suggested he might be as awake as I was. My phone, charging on the nightstand, remained silent. Darren hadn't contacted me in 3 days, not since his wife had become suspicious. The affair that had once felt like freedom now felt like a trap closing around me. At 3 a.m., I heard Colin get up and pad softly to his study. Through the thin walls, I could hear the scratch of pen on paper. More documentation, more evidence. I was beginning to understand that my husband wasn't the weak, passive man I'd thought I married. He was strategic, patient, and apparently much smarter than I'd given him credit for. The question now wasn't whether Colin knew about the affair. It was what he planned to do with that knowledge, and whether I had any moves left to make. Monday morning brought a phone call that changed everything. I was at my desk, trying to focus on data entry, while my mind spiraled through worst-case scenarios, when my extension rang. "Ms. Gresham, this is Ms. Patel from Human Resources. Could you please come to my office at your earliest convenience?" My mouth went dry. "Is there a problem?" "We just need to discuss a confidential matter. Nothing urgent, but I'd prefer to handle it today if possible." The walk to HR felt like a death march. Other employees glanced up as I passed, and I wondered if they knew something I didn't. The corporate rumor mill at Morrison & Associates was notoriously efficient. Ms. Patel's office was small and sterile, with motivational posters that felt more threatening than inspiring. She gestured for me to sit across from her desk, where a manila folder sat closed between us. "Ms. Gresham, I want to assure you that this conversation is confidential and preliminary. We're simply gathering information about some concerns that have been brought to our attention." "What kind of concerns?" "It's regarding your professional relationship with Regional Director Darren Muir." Ms. Patel opened the folder, revealing what looked like printed emails and photographs. "We've received reports of inappropriate conduct outside normal business hours." My heart hammered against my ribs. "I don't understand. My work with Mr. Muir has been entirely professional." "I'm sure you understand why the company takes these matters seriously. Relationships between supervisors and employees, particularly when one party is married to another employee, create potential liability issues." The phrase hit me like a slap. They knew Colin worked here. They knew we were married. This wasn't just about corporate policy. This was about the appearance of favoritism, conflicts of interest, and the promotion Colin had received. "I haven't done anything inappropriate," I said, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. Ms. Patel slid a photograph across the desk. It showed me entering Darren's apartment building, time-stamped from last Tuesday. "Can you explain why you were at Mr. Muir's residence during what should have been work hours?" We were discussing the Henderson project. Sometimes it's easier to work without office distractions. I see. Ms. Patel made a note. And this? Another photograph, this one showing me leaving the same building 3 hours later, my hair disheveled, my blouse wrinkled. The project was complex. Ms. Gresham, I'm going to be direct with you. We have documentation of multiple visits to Mr. Muir's apartment, phone records showing extensive personal communication, and witness statements regarding your behavior at company functions. She leaned forward, her expression not unkind but implacable. We also have concerns about the timing of your husband's recent promotion. The room seemed to spin around me. Who made these reports? I can't disclose that information, but I can tell you that we take allegations of workplace misconduct very seriously. Mr. Muir has been placed on administrative leave pending the completion of our investigation. Administrative leave? The words came out as a whisper. Effective immediately, and Ms. Gresham, I strongly advise you to contact a lawyer. While we haven't made any final determinations, the evidence suggests serious policy violations that could result in termination. I stumbled out of HR in a daze, my mind reeling. Darren was suspended. Someone had been watching us, photographing us, building a case. The affair, that had felt so secret, so carefully managed, had apparently been visible to anyone paying attention. Back at my desk, I tried calling Darren's cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. His office phone had been disconnected. Even his email bounced back with an out-of-office message. That evening, Colin was waiting for me in the kitchen again, but this time he wasn't alone. A woman in a business suit sat at our dining table, papers spread in front of her. Isolde, this is Jennifer Walsh. She's an attorney. My legs nearly gave out. Colin, what? Sit down, he said quietly. We need to talk. Jennifer Walsh looked up from her papers with professional sympathy. Mrs. Gresham, I want you to know that you have the right to legal representation during this conversation. During what conversation? Colin's voice was steady, almost gentle. The one where I explain that I've filed for divorce and emergency custody of Sophie. The words hit me like a physical blow. You can't. I can, and I have. Colin's expression was sad but resolute. I've been documenting your affair for 4 months, Isolde. I have photographs, phone records, witness statements, and your own admissions on tape. On tape? Our kitchen conversation last week, the one where you essentially confessed to the affair while trying to gaslight me into believing I was paranoid. He pulled out his phone, and I heard my own voice. Maybe if you acted like a man instead of a suspicious child. You recorded me. I recorded us. Every conversation where you tried to make me believe I was losing my mind while you were sleeping with my boss. Jennifer Walsh slid a set of papers across the table. These are divorce papers, Mrs. Gresham. Your husband is seeking dissolution of marriage on grounds of adultery, along with primary custody of your daughter. Sophie needs her mother. Sophie needs stability, Colin interrupted. She needs a parent who puts her first instead of sneaking around with married men. How did you... I stopped, realizing the question would only incriminate me further. How did I find out? You weren't as careful as you thought. The doorman at Meridian Towers was very helpful once I explained the situation. Darren's neighbors were quite observant too. Amazing how many people notice a woman visiting a man's apartment when his wife is out of town. The room was spinning. Everything I'd thought I controlled was crashing down around me. Colin, please. Please what? Please pretend this didn't happen. Please let you continue humiliating me while you destroy our family. His voice cracked slightly, the first sign of emotion he'd shown. I loved you, Isolde. I would have done anything for you. But you chose him, and now you get to live with that choice. Jennifer Walsh cleared her throat. Mrs. Gresham, you have 30 days to respond to these papers. I strongly recommend you retain counsel immediately. As they gathered their documents and prepared to leave, Colin paused at the door. I'll be staying at my mother's with Sophie until this is resolved. The house is yours for now, but the joint accounts have been frozen pending the divorce proceedings. You can't just take my daughter. I can, and I did. The emergency custody order is based on your compromised judgment and unstable behavior. If you want to contest it, that's your right. But Isolde, he looked at me one last time, and I saw not anger, but profound disappointment. I have 4 months of evidence showing that you chose your affair over your family. How do you think that's going to play in court? The door closed behind them with a soft click, leaving me alone in the house that suddenly felt like a mausoleum. My phone sat silent on the counter, no calls from Darren, no supportive texts from friends who didn't yet know what had happened. I was completely, utterly alone, and for the first time since this all began, I understood that Colin had been playing a much longer game than I'd ever imagined. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of legal consultations and devastating revelations. My lawyer, a harried public defender named Robert Kim, delivered bad news with the regularity of a metronome. "The evidence against you is overwhelming," he said during our third meeting. "Photos, recordings, witness statements, financial records showing gifts from Mr. Muir. Your husband's attorney has built an airtight case. What about my rights as a mother? Compromised by your decision to have an affair with your husband's supervisor. The court sees this as a pattern of poor judgment that affects your fitness as a parent." Darren had vanished completely. His apartment was empty, his phone disconnected, his social media accounts deleted. I later learned from office gossip that his wife had filed for divorce the same week as Colin, and that Morrison and Associates had terminated him for ethics violations. My mother tried to be supportive, but even she seemed shaken by the scope of the evidence Colin had gathered. "How could you be so careless?" Janet asked during one of her visits to my empty house. "If you were going to have an affair, why didn't you cover your tracks better?" "I thought I was being careful. You thought wrong. Colin played you like a chess master, and you never even realized you were in a game." The final blow came on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting in my kitchen, still in my pajamas at noon, when the doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw Colin's car in the driveway, Sophie's small face visible in the back seat. Colin stood on the porch with another man I didn't recognize, tall, silver-haired, wearing an expensive suit that screamed federal authority. "Isolde, this is Agent Martinez from the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division," Colin said without preamble. "He has some questions about your relationship with Darren Muir." My knees buckled. "FBI?" Agent Martinez stepped forward, his expression professionally neutral. "Mrs. Gresham, we're investigating allegations of corporate fraud and embezzlement at Morrison and Associates. Mr. Muir is suspected of manipulating personnel decisions for personal gain, including your husband's promotion." "I don't understand." "We believe Mr. Muir promoted your husband to create leverage in your relationship, essentially using company resources to facilitate an extramarital affair. We have evidence that he also provided you with gifts purchased using corporate funds. The jewelry, the expensive dinners, the weekend getaway to the coast, all of it bought with money stolen from the company. I wasn't just an adulteress, I was an accessory to embezzlement." "We'd like you to cooperate with our investigation," Agent Martinez continued. "In exchange, we might be able to work out a plea agreement that avoids federal charges." Colin watched this exchange with something that might have been satisfaction, but when he spoke, his voice was gentle. "Sophie's in the car. She wants to say goodbye before we leave for my mother's permanently." "Leave? You're moving?" "I got a job offer in Seattle. Clean start for both of us." He paused, studying my face. "You could have had everything, Isolde. A husband who adored you, a beautiful daughter, a comfortable life. But it wasn't enough, was it? You wanted passion, excitement, something more than ordinary happiness." "Colin, I hope it was worth it." Sophie ran up the porch steps, her small arms wrapping around my waist. "Mummy, Daddy says we're moving far away. Will you come visit?" I knelt down to her level, trying not to cry. I don't know, sweetheart, maybe someday. I love you, Mommy. I love you too, baby, more than anything. But as I said the words, I knew they weren't true. If I'd loved her more than anything, I wouldn't have risked losing her for an affair with a man who'd disappeared the moment things got complicated. Colin gently took Sophie's hand. Time to go, Princess. As their car pulled away, I saw Sophie's face pressed against the rear window, her small hand waving goodbye. Agent Martinez was still talking about cooperation and plea agreements, but his voice faded into background noise. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, dissatisfied but secure, married to a good man who loved me, mother to a daughter who thought I hung the moon. I'd thrown it all away for 6 months of stolen afternoons, with a man who'd used me as thoroughly as I'd thought I was using my husband. Colin had been right about one thing. I'd wanted more than ordinary happiness. Now I had less than nothing. No husband, no daughter, no job, no lover, and potentially federal charges hanging over my head. 3 months later, I signed the final divorce papers in a sterile conference room downtown. Colin looked tired but peaceful, like a man who'd finally set down a burden he'd been carrying too long. He was moving to Seattle the following week, taking Sophie to start their new life. I don't hate you, he said as we left the courthouse. I probably should, but I don't. I just feel sorry for you. Colin, No, he said firmly. We're done, Isolde. We've been done since the night you chose him over us. This is just making it official. He walked away without looking back, his shoulders straight and his head held high. The weak, passive man I'd thought I married had never existed. Colin had been strong enough to endure months of betrayal while building his case, smart enough to outmaneuver both me and Darren, and brave enough to blow up his own life to save his daughter from mine. I stood on the courthouse steps, watching my ex-husband drive away with my child, and finally understood the difference between wanting more and deserving it. I'd wanted passion, excitement, and validation. What I deserved was exactly what I'd gotten. Nothing. The federal charges were eventually dropped in exchange for my testimony against Darren, who was sentenced to 5 years for embezzlement. I kept the house but lost everything else that mattered. Some evenings, I sit in my empty kitchen and think about that unopened bottle of champagne, still gathering dust in the refrigerator, a monument to the night my husband tried to celebrate his success, and I chose to destroy our marriage instead. Colin sends me pictures of Sophie sometimes, school plays, birthday parties, bedtime stories in their new apartment overlooking Puget Sound. She looks happy, healthy, loved. He found someone new last year, a kindergarten teacher named Amy, who makes Sophie laugh and calls Colin by his first name, instead of taking him for granted. I'm alone now, truly alone, and I finally understand that this was always how it was going to end. Not because Colin was weak, but because I was. Not because our marriage was broken, but because I broke it. Not because I deserved more, but because I deserved exactly this, the consequences of my choices, playing out with the mathematical precision of a man who'd learned to document everything and trust nothing I said. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd opened that champagne bottle the night Colin got promoted, if I'd celebrated his success instead of resenting it, if I'd chosen gratitude over greed. But those are questions for a different woman, one who understood the value of ordinary happiness before she threw it away for something that was never real at all.